She arrived at the private jet terminal, ready to board her own plane. But just as she stepped forward, the pilot blocked her path. The room fell silent, eyes locked onto the unfolding scene. Whispers spread like wildfire. Then, in a matter of moments, everything changed, power shifted, and someone paid the ultimate price. What did the pilot see that left him speechless, and why did it cost him everything? Before we begin, which country and city are you watching from? And if you love powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you never miss one. Let's begin the story. Sophia Langston stepped through the glass doors of the private jet terminal, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. The air was crisp with the scent of luxury, freshly brewed espresso, leather upholstery, and the faint trace of expensive cologne from the other travelers in the lounge. It was a space designed for the elite, where wealth was an unspoken language and exclusivity was the norm. Dressed in a navy blazer with wide-legged trousers that moved effortlessly with her stride, Sophia exuded confidence. Her sleek leather bag hung at her side, understated yet commanding respect. She had worked relentlessly to reach this point, to belong in spaces like these. Not that she needed validation. She had built her empire from the ground up, proving time and again that she was more than deserving of a seat at the table. Approaching the check-in desk, Sophia offered a composed smile to the attendant, a young woman with neatly pinned hair and a crisp uniform. "Sophia Langston, flight to Geneva," she stated, her voice smooth but firm. The attendant's fingers danced over the keyboard before she glanced up with a polished expression. "Welcome, Miss Langston. Your aircraft is prepped and ready for boarding at your convenience." Sophia nodded, her dark eyes scanning the lounge as she accepted her boarding documents. The room was a quiet hum of power, executives murmuring over last-minute deals, pilots walking with measured authority, and staff gliding across the floor with rehearsed precision. This trip was critical. The Geneva meeting was more than just another business venture. It was the next step in global expansion, a move that could solidify her company's influence on an international scale. She had spent years refining her business model, outmaneuvering competitors who underestimated her, and navigating a world that often viewed her presence as an anomaly rather than an expectation. But Sophia was no stranger to the subtle weight of scrutiny. She had learned to recognize the fleeting glances, the momentary hesitations in greetings, the almost imperceptible shift in tone when people realized she wasn't just another assistant or executive's wife, she was the owner. As she tucked her documents into her bag, she caught sight of a uniformed pilot approaching from the side. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the self-assurance of someone used to command. His eyes flicked to her, and though his lips curved into a polite smile, there was something else there, something just beneath the surface. Sophia had seen it before. Still, she remained poised. She had built a career on handling men like him. If there was a problem, she would address it. If there was an unspoken challenge, she would rise above it. She was here for business, and no misplaced judgment was going to stand in her way. Sophia had just settled into one of the plush leather chairs in the private terminal lounge when she noticed a man in uniform approaching. Captain Todd Benson, according to the embroidered name on his crisp pilot's jacket. He moved with the confidence of someone who considered himself the authority in any room. But his gaze held something else as it flicked over Sophia, something assessing, something skeptical. She rose smoothly to her feet, meeting him at eye level as he reached her. Despite his outward professionalism, his body language betrayed him. The way his shoulders stiffened, the slight downturn of his mouth, the microsecond of hesitation before he spoke. It was all too familiar. "Miss Langston," he said, his voice controlled but carrying an unmistakable edge. "I'm Captain Benson. I'll be piloting your flight today." Sophia extended her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Captain." His handshake was brief, barely a clasp before he pulled away. It wasn't overtly rude, but it lacked the firmness and respect he would have shown any other client in her position. Sophia noted it but said nothing. She had learned long ago how to choose her battles. But then he spoke again. "We don't often see private clients such as yourself," he remarked, his tone carefully measured, but not careful enough. Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Clients such as myself?" she repeated, her voice steady, though a sharp edge cut through her words. Todd hesitated, shifting his stance. "I just mean, most private jet owners come from a certain background." There it was, the unspoken assumption, dressed in vague phrasing but laid bare in its meaning. For a moment, the only sound between them was the quiet murmur of the lounge, the distant roll of suitcase wheels against the marble floor. Claire, the check-in clerk who had processed Sophia's flight, stood nearby, her eyes flicking between them. She had heard the exchange, but she remained silent, busying herself with her terminal. Sophia let the moment stretch, watching Todd squirm under the weight of his own words. Then she tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "You mean private jet owners are usually white," she said bluntly. Todd's eyes widened, caught between the instinct to deny and the inability to fully mask his discomfort. I didn't say that. You didn't have to," Sophia replied, her voice as smooth as glass but carrying the unmistakable steel of a woman who had heard it all before. Todd cleared his throat, his smirk from earlier fading into something more defensive. "I was just making an observation," he muttered. Sophia took a step closer, not aggressive but commanding, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Let's be clear on something, Captain," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am the sole owner of this aircraft. Every detail of this flight, from the route to the catering, was arranged by my team and paid for with my money. If there's an issue, state it plainly." Todd exhaled through his nose, clearly realizing he had misstepped but too proud to outright apologize. "No issue," he said, his tone clipped. "Good," Sophia said, her expression cool. "Because I have no patience for people questioning whether or not I belong in the spaces I work twice as hard to enter." Todd shifted uncomfortably, his hands moving behind his back in a stiff stance. The arrogance he had walked in with had dimmed, replaced by something closer to reluctant acknowledgement. Sophia held his gaze a moment longer before turning back toward Claire, who quickly refocused on her screen, pretending to be absorbed in her work. Sophia exhaled, steadying herself. She had no time for distractions. The deal in Geneva awaited, and she refused to let anyone, especially someone like Todd Benson, derail what she had built. This was her jet. This was her success. And no pilot, no misplaced prejudice was going to change that. Sophia exhaled slowly as she made her way into the private lounge, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The space was designed for the elite, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway, sleek leather chairs positioned for quiet privacy, and a staff trained to anticipate the needs of the ultra-wealthy. Yet despite the opulence, she couldn't shake the weight of the morning's events. She lowered herself into a chair by the window, her gaze drifting outside. Her private jet sat gleaming under the morning sun, a masterpiece of engineering and success. It should have been a symbol of everything she had built, of how far she had come. But right now, it was also a reminder of the invisible battles she still had to fight. Pulling out her tablet, she attempted to refocus on the presentation she had prepared for the Geneva meeting. This deal had the potential to expand her business internationally, to solidify her legacy. Every detail was meticulously planned, every argument sharpened to perfection, but despite her best efforts, her mind kept circling back to Captain Todd Benson's dismissive handshake, his loaded words, his barely concealed skepticism. Her fingers tapped absently against the armrest. She had dealt with this before. Assumptions, patronizing remarks, the lingering doubt in a room when she walked in as the owner, not the assistant. She should have been used to it by now, but that didn't make it any less exhausting. A quiet voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Langston?" Sophia looked up to see Claire, the check-in clerk, standing beside her. The young woman's posture was professional, but there was something hesitant in her expression, as if she was debating whether to speak at all. "I was wondering if you'd like some coffee," Claire offered, "or perhaps something else." Sophia hesitated for a brief moment, then nodded. "Coffee would be great. Black." Claire smiled, relief flickering across her face. "Right away, ma'am." As the clerk turned to leave, Sophia spoke again. Claire paused, glancing back. "I appreciate your professionalism," Sophia said, her tone measured but sincere. "And your discretion." Claire blinked, surprised by the acknowledgement. Then, slowly, a warm smile spread across her face, one that held understanding. "Thank you, Miss Langston." It was a small moment, but it carried weight. Claire had seen what happened, and while she hadn't spoken up, she had noticed. Sophia turned back to the window as Claire disappeared toward the staff area. Outside, a crew member was performing a final inspection of the jet, moving methodically around the aircraft. The sight was grounding. This was her plane, her success. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. Leonard Hayes. She answered immediately. "Leonard, everything's set for Geneva," came the familiar, steady voice of her longtime associate. "I reviewed the proposal again this morning. We're locked in. How are things on your end?" Sophia exhaled, glancing toward the terminal entrance. Todd was nowhere in sight, but the discomfort of their earlier exchange still lingered. "Things are mostly fine," she said carefully. Leonard picked up on the hesitation. "What happened?" "Nothing I haven't dealt with before," she admitted. "Pilot with an attitude problem." Leonard's sigh was heavy with familiarity. "Want me to make a call?" Sophia smiled slightly. "No, I'll handle it." "I know you will." There was no doubt in his tone, only quiet reassurance. "But if it escalates, say the word." Noted. As they wrapped up the call, she spotted movement near the crew entrance. Todd had reappeared, speaking in hushed tones with another crew member. His expression was tense, his posture rigid. Sophia couldn't hear what was being said, but the energy between them was unmistakably uneasy. A few yards away, Claire had returned, coffee in hand. As she set the cup down on the table beside Sophia, her gaze flicked toward Todd. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You okay?" Sophia asked, catching the shift in Claire's demeanor. Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Just." Her voice trailed off as she glanced back toward the crew. "Captain Benson seems upset about something." Sophia followed her gaze. Todd's expression had darkened, and the other crew member looked just as tense. Something was brewing. Sophia picked up her coffee, taking a slow sip as she considered her next move. Whatever Todd Benson was plotting, she would be ready. Sophia had endured enough. She had built her empire with intelligence, resilience, and unshakable determination. She would not allow Todd Benson, or anyone else, to undermine her authority. She had faced men like him before, men who refused to accept that a black woman could stand at the top. With deliberate steps, she rose from her seat in the private lounge, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The room was hushed, the soft hum of quiet conversations and distant classical music filling the air. Claire, standing behind the service counter, noticed Sophia's movement and stiffened slightly, as if bracing for something inevitable. Sophia's path was clear. Todd stood near the crew entrance, engaged in a hushed but animated conversation with another crew member. His posture was tense, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. The frustration on his face was evident. Sophia didn't hesitate. "Captain Benson." Todd's head snapped toward her. His expression flickered between surprise and irritation before settling into a mask of forced politeness. "Miss Langston." She stood tall, composed, radiating an unshakable presence. "We need to talk." Todd straightened but didn't uncross his arms. His stance was defensive. "Is there a problem?" Sophia arched an eyebrow. "Yes, and I believe you know exactly what it is." A flicker of unease passed through his eyes, but he quickly masked it. "I don't believe I've done anything out of line, ma'am. I was simply following standard protocol." Sophia's expression remained steady. "Let's not pretend this is about protocol." The weight of her words settled over the lounge like an approaching storm. Conversation softened. Eyes discreetly turned in their direction. The staff, though trying to remain inconspicuous, were paying attention now. Todd shifted slightly, suddenly aware of the scrutiny. Sophia took a step closer, her voice low yet unwavering. "From the moment we met, you made it clear that you had a problem with my presence here, not as a passenger, but as the owner of this aircraft." Todd's jaw tightened. "That's not," she didn't let him finish. "Your handshake, your tone, your remark about clients such as myself." She let the words hang in the air, undeniable. "None of that was protocol. That was bias." Todd exhaled sharply, his eyes darting to the side as if looking for an escape. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was forced. "I think you're misinterpreting." "No, I'm not," Sophia cut in. "And I will make this very clear. If you cannot accept my authority as the owner of this jet, I will ensure you are replaced before this flight even begins." The room seemed to hold its breath. Todd's face paled slightly. He looked at her as if searching for any sign of bluff, but there was none. Sophia Langston did not make empty threats. Claire, standing near the counter, felt a surge of admiration. Sophia had handled the situation with the kind of strength Claire had only wished she possessed in past moments of injustice. Other staff members exchanged subtle glances. They had worked in elite spaces long enough to recognize what had been happening, but no one had dared to challenge it, until now. Todd swallowed hard. His ego, his pride, everything in him wanted to resist, but he also knew that Sophia had the power to follow through. He forced a tight nod. "Understood." Sophia held his gaze a second longer before turning and walking back to her seat. The lounge remained quiet for a few beats before conversations resumed, though the air was noticeably charged. But Todd was not finished nursing his wounded pride. Later, near the crew quarters, Todd stood in a secluded hallway, his frustration barely contained. "Can you believe that?" he muttered, his voice sharp with anger. "Threatening to replace me?" James, the younger crew member he was speaking to, hesitated before responding. "She's the owner, Todd. She has every right to call the shots." Todd scoffed, shaking his head. "She's on a power trip. Just because she has money doesn't mean she gets to talk down to me like that." James sighed. "It's not about money, man. It's about respect. You went too far." Todd's nostrils flared. "I did my job." "No," James countered, his voice measured but firm. "You made it personal." Todd glared at him. James didn't back down. The younger man had seen men like Todd before, too proud to admit when they were wrong, too blinded by their own biases to recognize the damage they caused. "You should let it go," James advised quietly, "before you dig yourself in deeper." But Todd's pride wouldn't let him, his jaw clenched, his mind already spinning with ways to regain control. Back in the lounge, Sophia sat with her coffee, her expression unreadable, but inside she knew this wasn't over yet. She had seen this pattern before. Some men, particularly men like Todd, never let things go. They held on to their resentment, let it fester, and looked for ways to reassert dominance. But Sophia had never been one to back down. Her phone vibrated. Leonard Hayes, her trusted associate, was checking in. She answered with a steady voice. "Everything is set for Geneva, just handling a small issue before takeoff." Leonard exhaled through the phone. "You need me to step in?" Sophia smirked slightly. "Not yet, but stay ready." Leonard chuckled. "Always." As she ended the call, she glanced out the window. Her jet gleamed under the sun, a symbol of everything she had built, a reminder of the barriers she had shattered to stand where she was. She was ready for whatever came next. Sophia sat in the private lounge, her posture composed but her mind sharp. The confrontation with Todd had left a sour taste, not because it was unfamiliar. She had dealt with men like him her entire career, but because it was exhausting. The battle was never just about proving her worth. It was about forcing others to recognize it. As she checked her phone, an email notification appeared on her screen. Subject: urgent, incident at private terminal. Her brows lifted slightly as she tapped to open it. "Miss Langston, it has come to our attention that you experienced an unacceptable encounter with one of our pilots. Please know that we take these matters very seriously. An internal review has been initiated, and we will ensure that appropriate action is taken. Your business and experience with elite aviation are of the highest importance to us. We apologize for any disruption this has caused and will follow up shortly with further steps." She was ready for whatever came next. Sophia sat in the private lounge, her posture composed but her mind sharp. The confrontation with Todd had left a sour taste, not because it was unfamiliar. She had dealt with men like him her entire career, but because it was exhausting. The battle was never just about proving her worth. It was about forcing others to recognize it. As she checked her phone, an email notification appeared on her screen. Her brows lifted slightly as she tapped to open it. "Ms. Langston, it has come to our attention that you experienced an unacceptable encounter with one of our pilots. Please know that we take these matters very seriously. An internal review has been initiated, and we will ensure that appropriate action is taken. Your business and experience with elite aviation are of the highest importance to us. We apologize for any disruption this has caused and will follow up shortly with further steps. Please do not hesitate to reach out if there is anything else we can do to rectify this matter." Sophia exhaled slowly, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of her lips. Across the room, Todd stood near the crew exit, his jaw set tight. His phone buzzed in his hand, and when he glanced at the screen, a flicker of dread crossed his face. He hesitated. Then, with a resigned breath, he turned away from the crowd and answered, "Captain Benson." Michael Connors's voice came through, calm but laced with cold authority. Todd straightened instinctively. "Sir, Michael didn't let him finish. "I just got off a call with our legal team." Todd swallowed, his fingers clenched around his phone. "I've read the reports. I've spoken to Claire. I know exactly what happened." Todd's stomach knotted. Michael continued, his tone unyielding. "Your behavior was unacceptable. You had no right to speak to any client, let alone a VVIP client, the way you did. You not only violated company policy, you jeopardized our reputation." "Sir, Michael cut him off again. "Stop talking." Todd froze. "You're not in a position to defend yourself. You meant exactly what you said and you know it. Now, here's what's going to happen. There will be disciplinary action. A full review is already underway, and I will be making a decision regarding your future with us." Todd's pulse pounded in his ears. "Until further notice, you are grounded." Todd opened his mouth, but no words came. "This is your only warning," Michael finished. "Do not make this worse for yourself." The line went dead. Todd stood there, stunned, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. For the first time he realized he wasn't untouchable. Back in the lounge, the final boarding call for Sophia's flight rang through the intercom. Sophia rose gracefully, gathering her things with an ease that masked the storm she had just weathered. The moment may have passed, but the message remained clear. She would not be dismissed. As she strode toward the jet, she caught sight of Todd, standing rigidly near the tarmac. His eyes flickered to hers, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no smugness, only the quiet weight of a man who had lost. But Sophia didn't stop. She didn't gloat. She simply gave him a single, measured nod and continued up the jet's steps, stepping onto the aircraft that was hers. The doors sealed behind her, the engines roared to life, and as the jet lifted off into the sky, Todd stood frozen, watching it disappear, without him. The jet ascended smoothly, piercing through the clouds as the earth below shrank into the distance. Sophia sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon. This wasn't just another flight, it was a moment of quiet victory. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension of the morning dissipate. The weight of Todd's prejudice still lingered, but she had long learned that such battles were never truly over. Her phone buzzed. "Leonard," she answered, her voice composed. "Yes, I just got word about the pilot," Leonard said, his tone tight with controlled anger. "Unbelievable. You shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense, Sophia. Not at this level." Sophia leaned back against the leather seat. "I know," Leonard sighed. "I hope they handle it properly." "They will," she replied simply. "They don't have a choice." Leonard paused, then said, "You handled it well. I would have lost my temper." Sophia gave a small, knowing smile. "That's the thing. They expect us to react. That's how they justify their behavior." Leonard was quiet for a moment. Then, softer, he said, "You shouldn't always have to be the one teaching these lessons." Sophia's fingers tapped lightly against her armrest. "I know," she admitted. "But until people like Todd are forced to face consequences, nothing changes." A brief silence stretched between them, filled with the unspoken truth. This was part of a larger fight. A soft knock at her seat divider pulled her from her thoughts. It was Claire. She held a tray with a glass of sparkling water, her posture a little stiff, as if debating whether to say something. Sophia motioned for her to speak. Claire placed the drink on the side table, hesitating before finally saying, I wanted to thank you." Sophia arched a brow. "For what?" Claire swallowed, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "For standing up for yourself." She lowered her voice. "I saw everything. I knew Todd was wrong, but she faltered, her face flushing with guilt. "I didn't say anything." Sophia studied her. Young, smart, careful. A woman still figuring out the risks of speaking up in a system that punished those who did. "I was afraid," Claire admitted. "Afraid that if I said something I'd lose my job, that no one would back me up." Sophia nodded slowly. She understood that fear well. "You don't have to explain," she said gently. "But let me tell you something." Claire straightened. "Never let someone else's prejudice define you," Sophia said, her voice steady. "Not in how you see yourself, not in how you move through the world." Claire's eyes glistened. She gave a small nod, her expression one of quiet realization. "Thank you," she whispered. Sophia inclined her head, signaling that the conversation was over. Claire gave a final, grateful smile before retreating. At the front of the cabin, Todd sat stiffly in the jump seat, staring blankly at the cockpit controls. He had been stripped of command, now only a passenger on a flight he was supposed to lead. His thoughts raced. Could he salvage this? He had never imagined that a single interaction, a moment of unchecked arrogance, could place his entire career in jeopardy. But as the jet soared at 30,000 feet, the weight of his actions finally settled on him. He had underestimated her, and now there was no going back. Sophia gazed out at the vast sky as the jet cut smoothly through the clouds. The world below seemed distant, small and insignificant. Up here, at 30,000 feet, the weight of the morning's confrontation still lingered, but she refused to let it consume her. She allowed herself a small smile. Justice, though slow, always finds its way. Todd's arrogance had finally met its reckoning, but Sophia knew this wasn't just about him. His behavior was merely a symptom of a deeper issue, a system that forced black professionals like her to constantly prove they belonged in spaces they had rightfully earned. Moments like these were exhausting, but they mattered. If she didn't challenge them, who would? The fight for respect was never-ending, but she had never been one to back down. Her phone vibrated against the leather seat. Without looking, she already knew who it was. "Leonard," she answered. "I just got off the phone with Elite Aviation's board," he said. His voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "They're taking this seriously. Todd's being suspended pending investigation." Sophia let out a slow breath, not in relief, but in recognition of the battle won. "They have no choice," she replied. "They know what's at stake." Leonard chuckled. "You mean they know who they're dealing with?" Sophia smirked. "Same thing." A pause. Then, in a quieter voice, Leonard added, "You shouldn't have to keep fighting these battles, Soph. But damn if you don't fight them well." Sophia leaned back against the headrest. "That's just it, Leonard. I don't fight them for me. I fight them so that one day someone like me won't have to." Silence filled the line, heavy with unspoken understanding. "And that's why you'll always win," Leonard finally said. Across the cabin, Claire moved carefully through the aisles, checking on passengers. She hesitated near Sophia's seat, summoning the courage to speak. "I just wanted to say, thank you," Claire said softly. Sophia turned to her, raising an eyebrow. Claire glanced around before continuing. for standing up for yourself. I wanted to say something earlier, but—" She trailed off, her voice laced with regret. Sophia studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "It's not easy to speak up, Claire. But never let someone else's prejudice define you." Claire's expression shifted, thoughtful, almost determined. She had witnessed something today, something that had changed the way she saw the world. She had seen power, not just in wealth, but in presence, in the ability to demand respect and receive it. She had seen what it looked like when someone refused to shrink. For the first time, Claire wondered if she had been playing small for too long. She straightened her shoulders, tucking that thought away for later. Meanwhile, Todd sat stiffly at the front of the cabin, his hands clenched in his lap. His mind replayed the morning's events over and over, the handshake, the dismissive smirk, the way he had hesitated before acknowledging Sophia's ownership. He had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. The email from Elite Aviation had been direct. "Your conduct is under review. Further action will be determined." Then came the call from Michael Connors, the CEO. The message had been clear: unacceptable, unprofessional. Consequences will follow. Todd had spent years moving through the industry with unchecked arrogance, but this time there was no escaping accountability, no excuses, no justifications, only consequence. And for the first time in his career, he felt something unfamiliar: powerlessness. Rising above, Sophia lifted her glass, taking a slow sip as the jet settled into cruising altitude. The smoothness of the flight mirrored her own journey. Turbulence may come, but she would always rise above it. She thought about the next meeting, the next deal, the next boardroom where she would walk in, fully aware that there would always be another Todd waiting. But she would be ready. She had always been ready. One flight at a time, one battle at a time, she would keep breaking barriers, because that's what she did, and no one, not Todd, not anyone, could stop her from soaring.